on there. Here we're recorded. And we need, of course, to share on Facebook. One of our last classes of Kings, we said, and also one of our last classes. Well, this is our last class of 2022. And as Mike just shared, in 1,009 years, there'll be no Hanukkah in 3031. It's December 31st, the first night of Hanukkah. So Hanukkah in 3031. Mark that on your calendar. There's no Hanukkah in that year.
Wow.
Sorry. But that is a fluke of the Jewish calendar. So we're starting chapter 19, but where we left off, pretty dramatic scene actually. The Assyrian army has laid siege to Judah, the kingdom of Judah. And the Assyrian emissaries of the king come before the Jews and say, look, you better surrender to us, otherwise we're going to destroy you. And they do it in Hebrew. They threaten the king and the city of Jerusalem in Hebrew. And again, where we left off, the governor, if you will, the Assyrian governor comes to King Hezekiah, or comes to Hezekiah's emissaries, and speaks to them in front of the city, and basically threatens them, and threatens Hezekiah, and basically says to them, do you think you can withstand us? None of the other kingdoms could withstand us, including the northern kingdom of Israel. Your people, your cousins, if you will, in the northern kingdom were destroyed by us, and none of them could withstand us. And it's true, the Assyrian Empire is the most important, most powerful military at the time. The Egyptians were second most powerful, which is what the king Hezekiah had done, is he had made an alliance with the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh. And again, the Assyrians say, what do you think, the Pharaoh's going to help you? He's not going to help you. Again, did any of the gods of the other nations save his land from the king of Assyria? Where are those gods? Right? And he says, which among the gods have saved their countries? The Lord, again, talking about our God, Adonai, is going to save Jerusalem. And they go back into the palace. They go into the city. They tell King Hezekiah, come in with their clothes ripped. And they basically say, we're doomed. And that's where we left off. So this is 722 BCE. This is about 2,800 years ago. This is all documented because we have the Assyrian record of this that we actually have discovered. Archaeologists discovered it 130 years, 140 years ago. It's also, as we said, in the British Museum as part of the records of the Assyrian Empire. The treasure of Nineveh that we discovered. Again, Nineveh is in modern day Iraq. And that's where the Assyrian Empire was based. So let's read about what happens now. And this is an interesting story because I think there's some relevancy. There's some modern equivalents that we can look at. So Judith, would you like to start reading for us?
It would be my pleasure. When King Hezekiah heard this, he rent his clothes and covered himself with sackcloth and went into the house of the Lord. He also sent Eliakim, who was in charge of the palace, Shebna, the scribe, and the senior priests, covered with sackcloth, to the prophet Isaiah, son of Amoz.
Yeah, and here we have a special cameo appearance from the great prophet Isaiah. And this is the Isaiah. That is the Isaiah that we're going to read next, the book of Isaiah, the largest prophetic book in the Bible, 66 chapters. It's chock full of really big prophecies, including the prophecies, of course, that the Christians love, which talk about the birth of a Messiah. This is very interesting because the birth of that Messiah, we actually know who it was. It was Hezekiah's son. But let's not get into that too much because it just celebrated the other guy that they thought was his birthday a couple of days ago. But this
The
is
other
actually really good timing because this is the time that people were going out of their minds because they literally thought they were going to be destroyed. And so the king says, let's go find out from Isaiah what we're going to do. So Isaiah was a real guy. We don't have extra biblical attestation to him. We don't have another source outside of the Bible that talks about him, but the Bible talks about him. We have his book. Remember, we don't have a lot of prophets that we hear about. We did hear about Jonah. Jonah, we have one reference we read about in the book of Kings, who lives around this time too. Isaiah lives around this time. The one problem with Isaiah that we historians kind of have is that the book of Isaiah, the book that is attested to as the book of Isaiah, we believe that there's two, probably actually three different authors of the book of Isaiah that lived at different times. And they're all put together as the book of Isaiah. Why? Well, part of it's the language of the book, part of it's the subject matter, the tone. Some people called it Deutero-Isaiah, which means the second Isaiah. We now actually believe there might be three different writers of Isaiah. But the book itself is very important for Jews. It's read a lot. We read it on Haftorah. We read it on Saturdays, for bar mitzvahs. A lot of bar and bat mitzvah kids have Isaiah as a Haftorah because it's read throughout the book of Deuteronomy as a Haftorah. Almost every week when we read a chapter, the Torah portions of Deuteronomy, we have a section of Isaiah. He's real important, Isaiah. He's considered, the biggest prophet, if you will, in a lot of ways. So he comes here, and you can see why. The king calls for him, and he wants to know what to do. So what's going to happen with this Isaiah?
They said to him, "Thus said Hezekiah, this day is a day of distress, of chastisement, and of disgrace. The babes have reached the birth stool, but the strength to give birth is lacking."
So let's look at what that little phrase says. The idiom, the babe has reached the birth stool. We believe, again, the idiom essentially means we don't know what to do now. We're at a critical moment. What's going to happen? Who's going to be able to save the mother and the baby? This is essentially the equivalent of this kind of what this moment is like. So here's what it says.
"Perhaps the Lord your God will take note of all the words of the Rabshakeh, whom his master, the king of Assyria, has sent to blaspheme the living God, and will mete out judgment for the words that the Lord your God has heard, if you will offer up prayer for the surviving remnant."
So they go to Isaiah and say, do something, Isaiah. Notice, by the way, they say, perhaps the Lord your God, not our God. Just kind of not really taking responsibility for things. But look at this curious thing that they do here, which is that Isaiah is a prophet of God, right? Isaiah talks to God. He's like Moses. They really trust Isaiah. And so they say, look, talk to God. And notice what they say to him. The Rabshakeh, which is, again, is the Assyrian governor, the Assyrian governor that's been put in charge. And again, we don't know, by the way, whether the Rabshakeh was actually Judean. He may have been a Jew. He definitely knows Hebrew because he talks to the people in Hebrew. So maybe he learned Hebrew, maybe he was educated, whatever. But he also could have been a Jew who was working for the Assyrians. But look at what he said. He blasphemed God. So they basically tell Isaiah, go back to God and tell God that this guy's been putting you down and saying that you're like all the other gods that got destroyed by the Assyrians. So get God mad. That's what he basically said to him. Go back and get God angry. Get God good and angry so he'll do something for us. That's the logic there. It's exactly what it is. Get God good and angry. That's what they just told Isaiah to do. So Hezekiah says to his ministers, go to Isaiah and tell him that. That's what he did. It's pretty simple.
When King Hezekiah's ministers came to Isaiah, Isaiah said to them, tell your master as follows. Thus said the Lord, do not be frightened by the words of blasphemy against me that you have heard from the minions of the king of Assyria. I will delude him. He will hear a rumor and return to his land, and I will make him fall by the sword in his land.
Right. So Isaiah gives him some really good news, which is, yeah, God's taking care of this. Don't worry about it. And he says to him, I'm going to make him get out of here. The Assyrian army is going to have to leave. And when he goes back, he's going to get killed. So this is what happens.
The Rav Shakeb, meanwhile, heard that the king had left Lachish. He turned back and found the king of Assyria attacking Livnah. But the king of Assyria learned that King Tirhakah, I found it, that King Tirhakah of Nubia had come out to fight him. So he again sent messengers to Hezekiah saying, tell this to King Hezekiah of Judah, do not let your God on whom you are relying mislead you into thinking that Jerusalem will not be delivered into the hands of the king of Assyria. Talk about your triple negatives. You yourself have heard that the kings of Assyria have done what the kings of Assyria have done to all the lands, how they have annihilated them, and can you escape? Were the nations that my predecessors destroyed, Gozan, Haran, Reseph, and the Beit Edenites in Telassar, saved by their gods? Where is the king of Hamath, and the king of Arpad, and the kings of La'ir, Sepharvaim, Hena, and Eva?
Yeah, we heard the same stuff last week, which is you're going to wind up like all of them. So what happens is that the Rav Shakeh hears that the king has stopped the siege of Lachish, which again is in Judah. And what also complicates this is that this other king, King Tirhakah, has come out to fight. Now, this is an interesting little whatever. I mean, it's a weird footnote in history that some people have seized upon and tried to figure out what the heck just happened. Who's King Tirhakah? And why are the Nubians involved in this battle? Where's Nubia? Anybody?
Africa.
Yeah, it's south of Egypt. So is this an ally of the Egyptians? Why is this guy getting involved? And I will tell you this, there are people today who say that this King Tirhakah, who's mentioned once in the entire Bible, is actually a black African king. He's the king of the Nubians. You've heard the word Nubian before. Woman's a Nubian princess, right? It's a black woman. This is a interesting story because in this story, a black king, it seems like, comes to the aid of Judah and scares off the king of Assyria in some way. Now, it's complicated by the fact that the Bible actually said that it had nothing to do with the king of Nubia. It had to do with the intrigue that's going on back in Assyria itself. So it does say that. So there seems to be two things going on here. And some people have said, well, there's two different stories here. There's two different narratives. This story got in there, but it's really the other story. Some people say this is the real story and the other story is not the story. We don't know anything about this King Tirhakah. We don't know who he was. We don't know other references to him. We don't know what's going on here, okay? We do know that there was a coup in Assyria. That we know about because we have the Assyrian records. So we do know that that happened too. But this story is an interesting story. And it's a story that has in the last generation or two taken on some interesting mythology, if you will, because it seems to imply that there were Black African kings that had a role to play in the biblical period. So you can understand that there are African Americans or Afro people of African descent that are saying, look, there are Black African kings that were fighting on the side of the Jewish people. So it's an interesting story that we don't really have. There are more and more, I would say, kind of midrashic elements to this story that have been kind of created in the last generation or two, as Africans and African Americans have tried to kind of develop these stories to learn from and to be inspired by. But this is what it says. I mean,
Ethiopia says that they have the ark.
no, but it is interesting, of course, that there is stories about Ethiopia in well, the stories of Queen of Sheba, but Queen of Sheba, we believe, was probably from Yemen. This is the same area of Ethiopia, but these stories this is a confusing story. At the very least, we don't know much about it. It has an element of intrigue to it, but we do know that, again, the Assyrians are trying to figure out how to close up their war against Judah while they're having some other stuff go on. And there is definitely some other stuff going on for the Assyrians. So the Assyrians are trying to get Judah to capitulate, to surrender, to go along with their program, their agenda. Judah's trying to stay somewhat, even though we already heard Hezekiah is paying tribute to the Assyrians. He's paying them, but they obviously want more control than just the money. They want to really, yeah, this is all happening 150 years earlier than the 150 years earlier, the 140 years earlier than the Babylonians. This is the predecessor, though, to that.
Right.
And this is what these people are dealing with. All right. So here's what Hezekiah is dealing with.
Hezekiah took the letter from the messengers and read it. Hezekiah then went up to the house of the Lord and spread it out before the Lord. And Hezekiah prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord of hosts, enthroned on the cherubim, you alone are God of all the kingdoms of the earth. You made the heavens and the earth. O Lord, incline your ear and hear. Open your eyes and see. Hear the words that Sennacherib has sent to blaspheme the living God. True, O Lord, the kings of Assyria have annihilated the nations and their lands, and have committed their gods to the flames and have destroyed them. For they are not gods, but man's handiwork of wood and stone. But now, O Lord our God, deliver us from his hands, and let all the kingdoms of the earth know that you alone, O Lord, are God.
Now that's a pretty powerful prayer. King Hezekiah's prayer that just got preserved for all time in the Bible is the prayer of a king who seems to get it. He seems to be one of the kings in the Bible who gets it. And there aren't a lot of them. He's a really good king. So we read about his great-grandfather Uzziah, who also seems to be a good king. We read about his grandfather 10 times over, King Solomon and King David, who seem to get it. King Solomon loses it, but King David seems to get it. At least he loves God. King David has definitely a rough time with people and with women, but he has definitely a feeling of loyalty and love for God. And Hezekiah does too. And Hezekiah not only says, hey, God, you're the most powerful God, or God, we can't let you down, you're our God. He says, God, you are the only God. There is no other God. All the other gods that got destroyed because they're not real. God, you're real. You can't be destroyed. There's no statue of you. There's no stone carving of you that can be destroyed. You can't be destroyed. And so he gets it. And what he says here, and what's critical about this, is that at least 2,700 years ago, 2,700 years ago, there are Jewish people, including the king of Judah, who says these words, there is no other God but God. Now, again, we have this in the Shema, but there are people who say that, again, the Shema, which is from the book of Deuteronomy, might have been written after this. Again, we don't know exactly when this line was written either, but let's assume that King Hezekiah said it, or at least somebody imagined that King Hezekiah would say this, though I believe that King Hezekiah did say this. And we have records from this period, so don't think that there wasn't a King Hezekiah. We have the Assyrian records that are carbon dated, and we know that there was a King Hezekiah. Not only that, we have found archaeological evidence in Jerusalem for King Hezekiah, 100%. We've found stone seals from his period. We think we found actually a record of Shebna, the scribe that we just read about. I mean, we don't know for sure it's the same Shebna, but very possible that the thing that we found was that same guy that's mentioned in the Bible. We know these people existed. This is not speculation. This is not, well, this is a story. Somebody wrote it hundreds of years later. We don't know exactly when this was written, but it's very possible it was written at the time. And it means that at least 2,700 years ago, there are people who have the same theological belief we do, which is that there's only one God. There's only a God that can't be seen or made a statue of, and isn't having children and isn't having wars with other gods. There's only one God. So King Hezekiah says this. And there seems to be an understanding that this God is for everybody too. Because when it says, let all the kingdoms of the earth know that you alone are God, there seems to be an understanding that everybody needs to know this too. Well, let's see what prophet Isaiah says about this.
Then Isaiah, son of Amoz, sent this message to Hezekiah. Thus said the Lord, the God of Israel, I've heard the prayer you have offered to me concerning King Sennacherib of Assyria.
Yeah, so Isaiah brings word back to Hezekiah that God's heard your prayer, which seems to imply that that's kind of miraculous. Isaiah at least wasn't there when the prayer was said, we assume, but God heard Hezekiah's prayer and then tells Isaiah, I heard his prayer. I heard it. And here's what's going to happen.
This is the word that the Lord has spoken concerning him. Fair maiden Zion despises you. She mocks at you. Fair Jerusalem shakes her head at you. Whom have you blasphemed and reviled? Against whom made loud your voice and haughtily raised your eyes? Against the Holy One of Israel. Through your envoys, you have blasphemed my Lord, because you thought, thanks to my vast chariotry, it is I who have climbed the highest mountains to the remotest parts of the Lebanon and have cut down its loftiest cedars, its choicest cypresses, and have reached its remotest lodge, its densest forest. It is I who have drawn and drunk the waters of strangers. I have dried up with the soles of my feet all the streams of Egypt. Have you not heard? Of old I planted that very thing. I designed it long ago and now have fulfilled it. And it has come to pass, laying waste fortified towns in desolate heaps. Their inhabitants are helpless, dismayed and shamed. They were but grass of the field and green herbage, grass of the roofs that is blasted before the standing grain. I know your stayings and your goings and comings, and how you have raged against me. Because you have raged against me, and your tumult has reached my ears, I will place my hook in your nose and my bit between your jaws, and I will make you go back by the road by which you came. And this.
Wait, hold on 1 second. So this is Isaiah's prophecy, essentially, against the Assyrians, which is, you think that you've done all this? I've let you do all of it. All the things that you think you've done, Sennacherib, I have let you do it. I have let you. And now, because of your arrogance and because you have blasphemed God, you didn't have to do that, but you have. You will now be chastised. You're done. So, this is a very interesting, if you will, understanding of what Assyria has done up until this time, which is that everything that they've done has been because God let Sennacherib do it. Look, we have the same issue now, which is how do we explain when destruction happens to us, especially to the Jewish people? The only answer can be is that God wanted it to happen. God let it happen. So that's either because God doesn't get involved and lets things happen and doesn't get involved, or that this is part of God's plan. God wanted it to happen for a reason. And that's what we have here. We have an understanding that many people still have, which is that even when bad things happen, they happen because God wanted them to happen. Teach us a lesson, to punish us. This is the theology that we still have. And that's why we have people who say that the Holocaust was a lesson from God. It's not a theology I like to hear, but you still will get it from people. Because if they have a theology that everything happens only because God wants it to happen or lets it happen, or it's part of God's plan, what are you going to do? But I don't know. I mean, it doesn't sit well with me. I don't believe 1.5 million children were murdered because that was part of God's plan. But there are people who believe that in our community. There's people who teach that in our community. I don't like to hear it, but people believe it. And it goes back to this understanding, which is that the Assyrians did what they did because God let them do it. And we're going to see it again with the Babylonians in a week, which is when the Babylonians destroyed the temple. It was because God let them do it. It was because Nebuchadnezzar is working as an agent of God, which means that by extension, everyone else who's gone to war against the Jewish people has been an agent of God. Even the darkest. I got a problem with that, but there's a consistent logic that people have had for a long time. So nothing you could say will change their mind on that.
But by the same token, don't some of those same people who believe that the Holocaust, let's say, was sent by God, if you will, don't they also believe that the story of what's his name in the oven?
Daniel?
No. That God, has given us the Torah. You know what I mean? That
You're talking
God
about.
has stepped back.
You're talking about, the other answer, which is the Talmud, which is that it's up to us.
Right.
Yeah, well, the issue is that, so Judith is talking about the Tanur Shalachnai, which is when they argue over what's a kosher oven, that they say, they tell God, you can't answer it anymore, you can't be involved anymore. Yeah, well, that they would say that comes down to understanding the law. You're right. So you could say, hey, God said, I'm not going to get involved anymore, which is one of the Talmudic answers, which is that God doesn't get involved anymore because we know. But the question still would be, Judith, is what happened? So what's the answer? When it comes down to understanding historical events, when it comes down to understanding how big picture things happen, the macro picture, not even necessarily, though some people would say every detail of one's life comes down to this, if
Okay.
it's all planned out. But on the big picture issues, when we have the Holocaust or the reestablishment of Israel or whatever it is, that is a major historical event for the Jewish people, then that's God did that. God let that happen, made that happen. And as I said, there are people who believe that that goes down to every single thing that happens in your life. But when it comes to big stuff, to answer Judith's question, yeah, there's people who believe that God gives us the ability to decide the answers of how to live our lives or how to follow the Torah. But when it comes down to the historical framework that we live in, that those big events are still guided by God. So yeah, it's, that's the answer. I mean, that's not my answer, but it's the answer that people would tell you, which is, yeah, we get to decide how we apply the Torah to living our lives to some extent, not just willy-nilly, but based on what the Torah says, we can figure out what the answer is. But
that's well, okay. I agree with you because that seems sort of like it's infantilizing.
Correct. And the idea that we're pawns in a drama carried out by God is essentially, again, well, we don't have a lot of gods, but we have one God who is still running the show. And there are people who like that, though. There's people who want to feel comfortable by that idea. I don't. What do you want me to tell you?
What happens to free will?
I
Is it
agree.
gone?
That's the issue, because even if you say, well, against the macro picture, against the backdrop, those are things that God is running. Yeah, then like, at what point does God say, well, you have free will over that, but you don't have free will over the bigger picture? Like, we run up against the wall. Look, I mean, there are people who would say that they make sense of that. It doesn't make sense to me, but there are people who can say, well, yeah, we have a certain amount of free will, but we don't have free will against the bigger picture of what the unfolding drama of the world. But yeah, I mean, essentially, isn't the unfolding drama of the world everyone's free will? I mean, the Nazis didn't. I mean, they were not a magical construction. There are historical events that happened. We know that 40% of Germans voted for the National Socialist Party it's a fact. In 1932, the largest party that won, they didn't get all the votes, but they got 40%. They were the most powerful party. They were voted. I was always told as a kid, the Nazis were only one party. Well, yeah, they were, but they were the largest party in 1932. They got the most votes. It was a plural, whatever. It was a parliament, right? It wasn't one party. It wasn't like they ran like the Democrats or Republicans, but they won 40% of the vote in Germany. So that happened. Those were people who voted for the Nazis, 42% of them. So yeah, it's hard to make the argument that like, again, they rose out of God's plan, but there are people it fits their theology, it fits their philosophy of things, which is that God basically is controlling everything and has a reason for these things, which it's a tough one, but it goes back to this, which is that there was a time when people could say these kinds of things. But again, if you live under a king who gets to have a lot of power over your life, then having a God that has a lot of power over your life is also kind of maybe even better. Because then it's not the king that can ruin my life or save my life, but the God, it's not up to a king, it's up to God. So anyways, this is God's, message, which is the Assyrians are going to go back. They're going to have to turn back. And again, they're treated like an animal, right? A hook in your nose, a bit in your jaw. I'm going to turn you around like a horse, right? Turn you around. You're going to go back. And here's what the prophecy says.
And this is the sign for you. This year you eat what grows of itself, and the next year what springs from that. And in the third year, sow and reap, and plant vineyards and eat their fruit. And the survivors of the house of Judah that have escaped shall regenerate its stock below and produce boughs above. For a remnant shall come forth from Jerusalem, survivors from Mount Zion. The zeal of the Lord of hosts shall bring this to pass.
Yeah, and this is an important idea. that there is a remnant that comes forth from Jerusalem. That, yeah, this is going to be a tough time. We know this is a tough time. But these people, the remnant, are going to be the ones that survive and become the future. And this is the word here, right here in Hebrew, she'arit. The she'arit. Why is this word so important? The remnant. Well, one of the very first synagogues in the New World, in America, in the early United States, is what, Judith?
Shaarei Tzedek.
Well, there's Shaarei Tzedek, that's true. That's here in Los Angeles. There's
Oh, it's
Shaarei
Shaarei Israel.
Israel
Shaarei
in
Israel.
New York.
In New York.
The original Sephardic Portuguese, right? The Portuguese Spanish synagogue in
Shaarei
New
Israel.
York is called She'arit Israel. The people who settled this country, the first Jews that came to the United States, saw themselves as a remnant. They called themselves the She'arit. They called themselves the remnant of Israel. Now, there were lots of other Jews living in other parts of the world at the time, but you can understand why Spanish Portuguese Jews that had survived the Inquisition, that were living in Holland or that were living in the colonies, wanted to get away from Europe, saw themselves as a She'arit. But whenever you see a She'arit synagogue like Shaarei Tzedek, well, no, that's Shaarei Tzedek. That's the gates of Tzedek. But She'arit, anything with a She'arit in it
Shaarei.
is a remnant. So what else is a She'arit? Israel itself. Because when Israel was established in 1948 out of the flames of the Holocaust, people saw it as a remnant. They saw this as a remnant, only a small group of people that survived destruction. Survivors who, interested in this part of history, come back to the land of Israel to reestablish Israel. But this idea that a remnant, only a small group are going to survive, is something that makes the Jewish people constantly feel like only some of us are going to survive. We're the remnant. We're either the remnant, right? We're either the remnant, or there's only going to be a remnant that survives. So we constantly feel like we're either the remnant itself or that a remnant of us are going to survive. It's constant throughout Jewish history, this remnant. Now, what's weird is that this idea actually also inspires early Christians who believe, as followers of Jesus, that they are the remnant, right? And so these early Christians believe that they're going to survive the Roman destruction as a remnant of the Jewish people to some extent. Now, what's ironic is they become a large group of people themselves, right? So they become not only they're not the early Christians are not just survivors. Eventually, obviously, they become the dominant religion of Europe. But it took a long time. It didn't happen overnight. And then we get to, I don't know, let's say 150, 200 years ago. And we have a great awakening in one of the new countries that becomes part of the Christian, that's part of the Christian world, but that is definitely inspired by a religious awakening in this country. And what do? They say that only a remnant will survive. And we have this explosion of Christianity in America, we call the Great Awakening, that is literally inspired by this idea that only a remnant will survive. And who are these people? Jehovah's Witnesses. 144,000 people will survive. That's it. Seventh-day Adventists who say only a remnant will survive.
But in mainline Christianity, there's also a remnant theology, which seems to be popular in some quarters again as mainline churches recede.
Well, that's an interesting thing that I want you to, this is Reverend Lynn now, for everybody who doesn't see her. You look on your screen, she can tell you this, but that's an interesting thing. I'll come back around, but I will tell you this, Reverend Lynn. Last week, I helped get some food. It was in the newspaper. I mean, not that we did it, but that they did it. The Mormons cleared out their troves of food storage
Storehouse.
to donate to the poor, which is wonderful. I had a whole back, I had a interesting, I'll just tell you that it's 2 seconds. The Mormon leaders that I'm friends with called me and said, we got to get this food out to people. We delivered it. We had it out at our place in Saugus. We have a lot left. So one of my Mormon friends called me and I said, let me help you to get that. This was on Thursday. So I went and picked it up from the Mormons. And then I gave it to the Seventh-day Adventists to deliver to their people. So there you go. The Mormons gave it to the Jews, who then gave it to the Seventh-day Adventists. And then we say, Had God Yah, Had God Yah. Anyways, but the food was there because the Mormons believe this too. The LDS Church believes that only a remnant are going to survive the apocalypse. That their food storage in every Mormon building you see, every LDS building you see has literally a bunker of food in it. Do you understand that? A bunker of food, and their people store the food in their homes. And this food is packaged and made by the Mormons, by the LDS Church. Every one of the cans was Desiree food. This is real, folks. This is really relevant for people because this remnant theology is part and parcel of, to some extent, Judaism from this point, but also Christianity. So everyone, I want to hear, how is this remnant theology now playing out in your, interestingly, I want to hear this. Is it playing out, you're saying, in mainline churches?
Well, absolutely. And some of us feel that it's a defense mechanism, so it makes what appears to be at least the demise of the mainline church can be accounted for in this very old theology. That is, this is not necessarily a bad thing. This is foretold by Isaiah and Scripture, and as you said, Scripture is for the future. It's an interesting thought. I think I've read that there are those who feel that climate change may speak to the remnant of the environment as well. So
that's interesting. Do you think that's an interesting idea? So do you think, because what I think I'm not putting words in your mouth, but I think what you're saying might happen. This is an interesting idea.
it is.
So here's the consequence of this. That the theology that is more apocalyptic and is more within the Christian world that we have in America today is more the more apocalyptic, the more let's say that type of theology is also probably going to be the least, I'm going to put it in a politically correct way, is the least sensitive to climate change and the least interested in hearing that type of talk about climate.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
So what could happen is that those who feel that they are keeping alive the remnant theology, if you will, of the mainline churches that are saying, yeah, we're shrinking, but we are concerned about what's happening to our world, to our environment. We're also concerned, obviously, about the approach, this theological approach, which is destructive and is perhaps, well, let's just say it, is intolerant and is putting people towards war and towards destruction, both of the earth and of kind of political and religious confrontation.
Perhaps it's God's will, you see.
Yeah, but what
They don't
the
have to be
consequence would
involved.
be is that those people that would push us towards destruction, both
Right.
climate-wise, environmental-wise, and geopolitically wise, that the only people left would be those people who are the more say the ones who are following more, we would say the message of Jesus, which is to love each other and to care for the world and to care for the environment. But that actually might be the new remnant theology that would play out for people who are following this other line, if you will, that is not.
Just a more first century Christian model.
Uh-huh. Interesting. Well, it's an
Yeah.
interesting idea, and it's definitely one that I'd love to see played out in our consciousness. That means through the media and through. I'd like to see, and I think we've kind of seen some of these, but I don't think anyone's really articulated it as eloquently and as powerfully as it should be, really, which is that, yeah, that such a thing could actually happen. What's interesting that I've kind of been thinking about lately is, it's interesting that the Jewish community, at least would say the 70-80% of the Jews of America that don't subscribe to a confrontational ideology, would also find more common cause in that than they would with people who are more into a predetermined or predestined idea that there is going to be a light versus dark type of confrontation. The interesting thing about that is essentially all we're doing is recycling that and repurposing that by saying again that only a remnant of this. Essentially, we're buying into the same story. We're just repurposing it for our own, for our own agenda, which is to say, yeah, the majority of the world is insane, and only a small fraction of us are not going to be insane. The weird thing is that it's actually saying that the people who actually believe that this stuff has to happen are the majority and are causing this to happen, whereas we're not believing in that. That has to happen, and we're the remnant. So the irony is that the remnant is actually the people that are trying to be logical and aren't trying to force this, if you will.
Right.
Which is an interesting story. I mean, it's an interesting, ironic. This is the definition of irony, in that the people who are trying not to have this confrontation happen are the remnant themselves, right? Because if the people,
yes, and there's this sort of, doesn't there seem to be this parallel path?
Yes. Yes. But
yeah.
the funny thing is that the people who are actually doing this are the people who are the rational, fundamentalist folk. So this is a weird thing. Yeah. But I think it's there is a constant feeling like it seems like the majority of people are trying to drive us over the cliff. And they are definitely feeling this during the time of Hezekiah, which is the world is going off the cliff. And only a sharit, only a remnant will survive. All right, so here's the good news.
Assuredly, thus said the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not enter this city. He shall not shoot an arrow at it, or advance upon it with a shield, or pile up a siege mound against it. He shall go back by the way he came. He shall not enter this city, declares the Lord. I will protect and save this city for my sake, and for the sake of my servant David.
Right. So Jerusalem is going to be okay. Yay. Jerusalem is not going to be destroyed. The rest of the country was destroyed. The rest of Judea seems to have been destroyed, but Jerusalem is not going to be destroyed. So the Assyrians plan on taking Jerusalem. They have a siege against it, or they've conquered everything else around it. They are ready to lay siege to it. They know it's going to be a tough battle. Jerusalem is protected on all sides by, an incline. People have to go up in order to get to it. Natural defenses, and of course, there's a wall even back then, around Jerusalem. Not going to be easy to capture it. There's water inside the city, which means, there's water inside the city, by the way, because King Hezekiah makes a tunnel and brings water into it. We still have that tunnel, Hezekiah's tunnel. But it's going to be a tough battle. But according to this, there isn't going to be a battle.
That night, an angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. And the following morning, they were all dead corpses. So King Sennacherib of Assyria broke camp and retreated and stayed in Nineveh.
Oh, that's weird. 185,000 Assyrians died? Yeah, that's his capital. Then he goes back to Nineveh. Well, according to this, they all died of plague. That doesn't seem to really have happened. That doesn't seem to have happened. Why? Because, well, first of all, the Ninevites didn't write about it, and they would have written about if 185,000 people of their army died. So they don't have a version of that. Look, the fact is it says an angel did it, right? There are people who say, well, maybe it was this battle that he had to fight with the Nubians, that the Nubians killed his army. I don't know, it doesn't say that, but maybe that's what really happened. It's also very possible that the king has to go back to Nineveh. Why? Let's take a look in the next verse. So again, the Bible says that there's a plague. The Bible also says that there's a king of Nubia who's fighting against them. But the Bible also tells us something else. And this is what the Assyrians tell us.
While he was worshiping in the temple of his god Nisroch, his sons, Adramelech and Saretzer, struck him down with the sword. They fled to the land of Ararat, and his son, Esarhaddon, succeeded him as king.
And that's the real story. The real story is there was a coup. The real story is that his sons killed him. Now, his sons didn't kill him without having support behind them, but these two sons kill him. And what seems to have happened based on this story is the sons killed him, and the coup didn't go down the way they thought it would go down. Why? Because they fled the land. Well, they didn't flee because they were successful. They flee because it didn't work. But their dad was dead, which means that another son became king, and his name is Esarhaddon. He is the next king of Assyria. So whatever happened back in Assyria, how it happened, at least according to the Bible and according to the version that the Assyrians had, which is essentially this one, Esarhaddon was murdered. Sennacherib is murdered, and Esarhaddon becomes king. Now, let me just show you on a map quickly what the kingdom of Assyria looked like at that time. So there was a coup. And that seems to have been enough for any of the other things to have happened. And again, I'm not saying that they didn't happen. We don't know that again, this battle with the Nubians happened just because we don't have the Assyrian version of that story. Let me just show you real quick the map of Assyria. So during this period, Assyria, the empire was here. The darker green, that's the Assyrian Empire in 824. At its height in 671, it went all the way into Egypt. You can see Egypt was under their authority, and all the way down here to Nubia. Down here is the beginning of Nubia. So Judah, you can see, is right here. So look, if Assyria is not able to conquer the kingdom of Judah, that's a pretty significant thing because they conquered everything else. So here's Nineveh, here's their capital. Here's Persia, the extent of their empire to the east and to this, in that direction, south. And here's Mesopotamia right here. Here's Babylonia. And there's where the Assyrian capital is. There's Babylonia. Now, why am I showing you that? Because this is going to be the next problem for the Assyrians. The Babylonians end up rebelling and conquering Syria here to the north. So you can see Assyria is closer to Judah than Babylonia is. But this whole area that they conquered, the places we heard about, Gozan, Arpad, Hamat, over here, Arvad, this is Lebanon. All of these areas they conquered, the Assyrians eventually conquered. So when it says that his sons go up to the kingdom of Ararat, Urartu, they go up here. Just so you can see the other kingdoms that are existing at this time. Here you have Greek city-states that are at this point not even close to being an empire. You have the kingdom of Sardis, Lydian kingdom, the Phrygian kingdom, which is what King Midas, the Midas touch, he was Phrygian. And then you've got these other kingdoms up here that are kind of people we hear about from the Assyrians, and maybe we write about them a little bit. It's hard to tell, but these are Europeans and, if you will, Caucasian or I would say more European peoples up here, and they're like barbarians compared to what's going on here and here. But again, Judah's right in the middle. So we just read that his two sons who started a coup against him, they flee up here, which is essentially, by the way, today, this kingdom of Urartu is partly, you'd call them kind of Turkish, but also really at this point, the Turks, the Ottoman Turks or the Turks from the east aren't here yet, but they're peoples, whatever, the people here. These are probably, again, like Proto-Armenians and the people who make up the Turks, the Turkish peninsula here before they're Ottoman, before they're before they're Turkic peoples, but the people who inhabit that area. So this is who is in the north of the kingdom, and we're here. This is us, and here in the south. And this is the Arabian Peninsula, which is, essentially desert until you get down here, which we can't see on the map. But when you get down to Yemen and to the bottom of the Arabian Peninsula, this is all desert. No one lives here. So this is the Fertile Crescent, the area we call the Fertile Crescent. I mean, this area is also desert here, by the way, but you go from here to here to here, back down here, but this is all desert here. Tadmor is an important city. It's Palmyra, or Tadmor, has both names, Palmyra. This is on the Fertile Crescent, taking people along the rivers. So that's where we are. So they're here. The Assyrians, they have to go back up here. He gets killed here. Sennacherib gets killed here. And again, the next big part here is Babylon. They're going to be the next people who come out of that area of the Mesopotamia between the rivers. So Sennacherib gets killed. He was very powerful, but he dies. At least according to this, again, and according to the Assyrians, he's killed by his own family. Any questions, comments? Look, why is this interesting, relevant? I would say kind of even more so today. Why is this, I was thinking about it today. Assyria is the first great empire in history, in the sense that they're the first country that just conquers other countries to expand their power. They're not doing it. They're not conquering Judah because they're their next door neighbors. They're 500 miles away, 600 miles away. They're literally just trying to create an empire. So they're the first, most people consider them the first empire. The Babylonians who succeed them, who overrun them, become the next great empire. So then the Persian Empire, and then the Greek Empire. But these empires all kind of take their lead from the Assyrians. But there's obviously a geopolitical issue here, which is that Israel or Judah is caught in the middle. But I would say, if you want to use a modern equivalent, look, the Assyrians came into Judah, they're stopped. And then they have to go back to deal with internal problems that they have. So I would say that the equivalent could be, you could say, look, when we're looking at what's happening in Ukraine right now, if Russia tomorrow had to pull out of Ukraine because there was a coup back in Russia, such a thing could happen. The Ukrainians, if they were writing their story, would say, look, there was a coup, but they'd also recognize that the Russians shouldn't have been there in the first place. And the reality is why is Ukraine even able to hold out against the Russians? Because we're giving them arms, just like the Egyptians were doing for us. The Egyptians said, let's fight in Israel and in Judah so that we don't have to fight in our own backyard, which guess what? I just showed you the map. They ended up having to do that anyways, but they bought 30 or 40 years. So, hello, it makes sense. And it's very, very similar to what's happening today, which is that we're saying, look, we're going to stop Russia from entering any other countries. It's not just about Ukraine. We don't want them to enter Poland, and we don't want to create that situation. But look, that's what happens today. And we let Russia do this for the last 20 years. We let them expand their borders. We let them take part of Ukraine. We let them go into Chechnya and kill all the Chechnyans because we didn't want to deal with it. We didn't want Chechnya to separate. We didn't want to send our Americans to Chechnya to be involved there. But we laid down the law. We said in Ukraine, and by the way, we're not sending our own people there, obviously, to Ukraine, but we're sending weapons. So we do the same thing today. So what can we hope for? Well, maybe we can hope for a coup back in Russia. Maybe that's what we can hope for. I think we do hope for it, by the way. I think most people outside of Russia are hoping that there's a coup in Russia, and that's the way the war is going to end. That's my guess. So what happens? Back to Hezekiah.
In those days, Hezekiah fell dangerously ill. The prophet Isaiah, son of Amoz, came and said to him, "Thus said the Lord, set your affairs in order, for you are going to die. You will not get well."
That's another way of saying it. You're not going to get well, you're going to die, right? You're going to be seriously sick to the point that you're going to die. So that's serious. I mean, look, Hezekiah seems like a good guy. Why is he getting sick? And Isaiah comes to him and says, you better get your affairs in order. You're going to be gone. Now here's Hezekiah.
Thereupon Hezekiah turned his face to the wall and prayed to the Lord. He said, "Please, Adonai, remember how I have walked before you sincerely and wholeheartedly, and have done what is pleasing to you." And Hezekiah wept profusely. Before Isaiah had gone out of the middle court, the word of the Lord came to him. "Go back and say to Hezekiah, the ruler of my people, thus said Adonai, the God of your father David, I have heard your prayer. I have seen your tears. I'm going to heal you. On the third day, you shall go up to the house of the Lord. And I will add 15 years to your life. I will also rescue you and this city from the hands of the king of Assyria. I will protect this city for my sake and for the sake of my servant David."
Yeah, well, that's a miracle, folks. And we don't see a lot of them by this point. I do want to point, I want to say that in the Bible, we don't see God doing things like this that often. By this point, by 722, 720 BCE, we don't see God doing this, which is getting involved and changing things up. And here God has done it a couple times for King Hezekiah. He seems like he just heard Hezekiah's prayer. And of course, he says, I'm doing it for King David too. I love King David. Your ancestor, King David, was a great guy. I promised him I'm going to take care of his family. I'm going to take care of the city of Jerusalem. I'm going to take care of the kingdom. And I'm going to do it for him too. You have done good things, and I'm going to do a miracle for you. I'm going to heal you. But this is Hezekiah's prayer and Hezekiah's miracle. And it's not over. But Hezekiah gets a miracle. And this is a significant thing, because God doesn't seem to be doing this a lot at this point in Jewish history. Again, God was parting the Sea of Reeds before. Now, again, if God sent the plague to kill 185,000 people, that's also a huge miracle. But regardless, this is a personal miracle that Hezekiah gets. And it seems to, again, fly in the face of something really important, which is that these good kings don't have easy lives. They don't live long. They are not healthy necessarily. Remember, his great-grandfather, King Uzziah, he had some kind of leprosy. He had some kind of skin disease that he had to live in a special building for because he was sick. Again, it probably wasn't leprosy, but it was some kind of skin condition that was very serious. So, and King Uzziah was a good king too. So these kings don't necessarily have easy lives, and they don't have necessarily even long lives. Something to think about. It's not easy for them. So.
Then Isaiah said, get a cake of figs. And they got one, and they applied it to the rash, and he recovered. Hezekiah asked Isaiah, what is the sign that the Lord will heal me, and that I shall go up to the house of the Lord on the third day?
Right. So there is some kind of medicine that was applied here. It says it's figs, right? That's what the word is. It says Tanaim. I mean, it's like a fig paste. And there's some kind of rash.
A poultice.
Yeah, poultice. So he gets cured of the rash, whatever it was that was outwardly affecting him. It was obviously not just a rash, but something serious was happening. And
my translation says boil.
Boils?
Not rash, but boil.
Okay. Look, I mean, it is the word shechin, which is the word we use in the Bible for boils, or at least for the 10 plagues. Whatever it is, he has got an outward symptom on his skin. But that obviously is just part of it, right? Because he's supposed to die. But Hezekiah says, how will I know that this is really happening? Give me a sign, God, that I'm going to be okay. Which is weird, because he only knew that he was going to die because Isaiah told him he was going to die. But now he wants to know that Isaiah is accurate in his other prediction, which seems weird. But he knows he's sick. So he knows he's sick. He sees it on his body. He knows he's sick. Isaiah told him he's going to die. Now he tells him he's going to live, but he says, I need proof. Show me proof. Isaiah, I need God to show me I'm not going to die. So here's what Isaiah says.
Isaiah replied, this is the sign for you from the Lord, that the Lord will do the thing that he has promised. Shall the shadow advance 10 steps or recede 10 steps? Hezekiah said, it is easy for the shadow to lengthen 10 steps, but not for the shadow to recede 10 steps.
So what are they talking about? Here's what your translation, somebody give me what one of their translations says. Reverend Lynn, what does yours say about this?
For which again? Which word?
For these words of the steps. Shall the shadow.
Oh, it says steps.
Okay. Well, here's what the degrees. Okay. Well, here's what is important about this.
It's sundial.
Yep.
Well, the alternative would be track the sun.
Yeah,
Yep.
sundial.
So here's what it says. Keep going. Read the next paragraph.
So the prophet Isaiah called to the Lord, and he made the shadow which had descended on the dial of Ahaz recede 10 steps. He made time
Turn
go
back
back.
time.
Yes. So what we're talking about here is a sundial. Now, in old days, they used sundials that, let me put one up here for you to see. Yeah, usually, you see sundials like, I'll show you. What is? Shoot, I didn't see that. Judith, The Empire Strikes Back for the, that was her thesis on the
My
Assyrians.
sister's thesis.
Why did she write about the Assyrians?
She was an archaeology major, and I don't remember why the Assyrians in particular, but she did part of her thesis. She did some digging in Lachish.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. But so
Yeah, so
it was subtitled The Empire Strikes Back.
Strikes Back. So they have the original empire. So here's a sundial, the way we normally see sundials. But that's not the sundial. And then you see that somebody did a Bible picture of a sundial like that. That's not what the sundials look like in Egypt, or at least what we think archaeologically they look like. It's probably more like something like this. But the point is that this is the way people would know what time would be like. So he's saying, look, you could get the sun to show maybe a darker point. It's not such a weird thing. But if it moves back, that's a miracle. So he actually says to him, what would be a bigger miracle for you? To see a sun go back or go forward? So he says, I want to see it. I want to see it go back. So
So we made it go back.
yep.
Next verse, roll it up a little bit. At that time, King Berodach, Baladan, son of Baladan of Babylon, sent envoys with a letter and a gift for Hezekiah, for he had heard about Hezekiah's illness.
Now, that's why I just showed you Babylon. Because you could start to see what's happening. The Babylonians are getting into the picture, which is the Babylonians are trying to get into the good graces of Judah so that when they're going to declare independence and become an empire or whatever, an army of their own, they are going to try to make nice with Hezekiah and the Judeans early on. Why? Well, you can say what you want about Hezekiah and about Judah being a little tiny kingdom. They withstood the Assyrians. Look, it's either a miracle of God or bad timing for the Assyrians. But whatever happened, the Assyrian record tells us, and what's interesting about the Lachish, right? The siege of Lachish, which we shared before, we have the Assyrian record of it, right? It's the Assyrian record of these battles. The Assyrians said that they put Hezekiah, they called him a caged bird, is the way they described it. King Sennacherib, when he describes Hezekiah, he says, I kept him like a caged bird, which meant he was holed up in Jerusalem like a bird. He couldn't get out. But the point is even they had to admit that they weren't able to conquer Judea. They weren't able to do it. So this tiny little kingdom was able to withstand the might of the Assyrians. Bottom line, right? So when we see what the Assyrians did to Lachish, which again, just to remind you, this is the Assyrian version of it. This is the Assyrians literally taking Judeans and putting them on spikes after they laid siege to Lachish, before they went up against Jerusalem. This is what Jerusalem knew was going to happen to it, by the way. Why? Because they knew what the Assyrians did. They weren't going to surrender. When you know that that's the way you're going to wind up, you don't surrender. So look, the Babylonians were like Hezekiah, man, he's a good ally for us to have. So no matter what, we survived the Assyrians. It's bottom line. Either God's miracle or good timing or whatever. So according to the Bible, this king of Babylonians, sends a gift to Hezekiah.
Hezekiah heard about them, and he showed them all his treasure house, the silver, the gold, the spices, and the fragrant oil, and his armory, and everything that was to be found in his storehouses. There was nothing in his palace or in all his realm that Hezekiah did not show them.
So the Babylonians send a gift. Their emissaries come to visit King Hezekiah. And what does King Hezekiah do with the Babylonians? He shows them all his great stuff. Look how great I am. Look at all my toys. Let me take you around and show you all the wonderful things I have in my kingdom. I'm going to show you my palace. I'm going to show you my great temple to God that I have. I'm going to show you all my treasures. Look at all these treasures.
They were just casing the joint.
They were just casing the joint. Now, doesn't happen tomorrow, doesn't happen the next day, but it is not a good thing. And it shows Hezekiah's weakness, which is he's a little braggy.
Then the prophet Isaiah came to King Hezekiah and said, "What?" he demanded of him. "What did those men say to you? Where have they come to you from?" "They have come," Hezekiah replied, "from a far country, from Babylon." Next, he asked, "What have they seen in your palace?" And Hezekiah replied, "They have seen everything that is in my palace. There was nothing in my storehouses that I did not show them."
And here's Isaiah.
Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, "Hear the word of the Lord. A time is coming when everything in your palace, which your ancestors have stored up to this day, will be carried off to Babylon. Nothing will remain behind, said the Lord. And some of your sons, your own issue, whom you will have fathered, will be taken to serve as eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon."
Wow.
Not just serve, but serve.
Yeah. So he just told him, "You idiot. You just showed the Babylonians everything that we have. That stuff is gonna be
Egotistical idiot.
Yep. That
Logistical
stuff
idiot.
is going to be in their palace one day, you dumb dude. And not only that, your family, your descendants are going to be in the court
Eunuchs.
as eunuchs." Means exactly what that means. They will be sorry seen. They will not be having children anymore.
Among other things.
That's what your descendants will be. They're eunuchs. Now, if that scene happened the way the Bible says it just happened, Isaiah just let out a prophecy about what's going to happen when the Babylonians get on the scene. And it did happen. Now, you could say that either Isaiah, again, spoke to God or made a prophecy or whatever. Look, you don't have to, God didn't have to open up Isaiah's ears and say this to him. Isaiah could have just been a really smart guy who knows that don't be an egotistical idiot to an up and coming empire because you're just asking for it. I told you a couple weeks ago, 500 years later, the Judeans did the same thing with the Romans. When they were fighting during the time of Hanukkah against the Greeks, the Judeans, again, led by the Maccabees, led by the Hasmoneans, they went to the Romans and said, "Be our allies against the Greeks." You know, nobody told the Maccabees, no one pulled them aside like Isaiah did and said to them, "You're an idiot. The Romans are going to be more powerful than the Greeks. You think the Greeks are a problem? Wait till you see the Romans." Nobody did that, but they could have. And it's a lesson throughout history, which is don't think that you're going to get help by somebody who has an agenda of their own. Now that's on the national level, right? The international level, the geopolitical level, but it happens on a personal level. If you make an alliance or if you become friends with somebody who isn't a good person just because it's going to serve your needs in the short term, don't be surprised when that person takes away everything from you later on. And it happens all the time to people. They don't have to be nations. People do it. They become friends with people who they know are bad people so they can get something done in the short term. And then it turns around and bites them. Look, anyone who ever made a deal with, an extortionist or a protection racket or a loan shark has been in the same situation, which is that they wind up owing everything to that person and they end up losing everything. So the short-term fix can oftentimes, of course, become the tragic undoing of somebody. And it happens all the time. This is a tough one. Because you can imagine Hezekiah just got 15 years of his life. He just bought some time on this planet, but it didn't go very well. Because he just found out that the future does not look bright for his kingdom, for his descendants. It's not good.
Hezekiah declared to Isaiah, "The word of the Lord that you have spoken is good." For he thought, it means that safety is assured for my time.
That is a statement of an idiot, which is, okay, as long as it doesn't affect me. That is insane. So we definitely get to see Hezekiah's weakness, which is that he's very short-sighted. He's very, very much about himself and not what happens to the future. So as good as he was, as nice as he was, as loyal as he was to God, he's not very smart when it comes to the future.
I mean, back in biblical days, were people really looking towards the future? And not,
It's an interesting question. Did a king, is he any different what you're saying than any other king?
exactly.
I will tell you that doesn't seem to be the case with King David.
Right.
King David seems to have, at least by the way, understood and loved his children. He's obviously very disappointed by them, but the reason he loves Absalom is because he sees the future of his kingdom. And I think, you can make the argument that because he's the first king in the dynasty, he's definitely thinking about his future.
And Moses looked at it.
Moses looks at the future. There's definitely people that do. The prophets always do. They're always looking to the future. But I think,
God did.
I don't think a lot did. And I think that unfortunately, there's a lot of people who view that, when they're serving as president or they're serving as whatever, prime minister, they don't think about the future. I think that
Isn't what Hezekiah said and did just what you had said that we had done in terms of Russia,
Yep.
just
Yep.
it's what people tried to do with Hitler in the beginning. Just let him do that and then he'll stop.
buy some time. Let's just buy some time. And I
Give
think
them an inch, they'll take a mile.
I think this
That's
is
right.
this is the thing that people do all the time, which is it, look, I think there's really always, of course, there's a fear that, who knows what's going to happen. So can't really figure it out. And there is, I feel it sometimes, which is like, what's the use? What's the use, right? Because who knows whether we're even going to be here tomorrow? It's like that, it's like I'm sitting there saving for retirement. I'm like, I could die tomorrow. So what difference does it make? It's like, who knows? I don't know. I sit there thinking I sit there with we met with a financial planner a couple of days ago and I'm like, well, you got to save to, you got to live to your 80s and 90s. I'm like, I have two parents that barely made it through they barely got into the 70s. I'm like, what are you telling me that for? I don't know that. But of course I got my wife, it's not just about you, but we always think about that. We always think about whether we got to enjoy the moment or we have to think about the future, right? We have to defer our own enjoyment. Here, there's clearly a judgment here that Hezekiah he says, I'm okay for my life. And that's what it says, my days, what does the King James say there, Mary? In my days, which again, same thing as my time, but the word in Hebrew, bma, in my days, means again, like as long as I'm living, it's going to be okay. I mean, look, there's definitely, it's not the way to live. I mean, we want the future to be good for our kids, for our family, for the next generations. We want to make sure that the world that we have is not the last version of the world, right? We want to make sure that it's going to get better. But yeah, there are. Yeah, I mean, look, that's exactly what Neville Chamberlain said, peace in our time. I mean, that's what he said.
Right.
Giving Hitler, the Sudetenland would assure peace in our time. I mean, this is obviously not the way we're supposed to live, because you can't, first of all, you can't be sure that it's even going to last tomorrow, right? We don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow, but also you can't live like that. You have to live to do your best to make sure that things aren't going to be just good tomorrow and the next day, but they're going to be good 10 years from now, 20 years from now. You have to live like that, but it's hard. It's not easy. Even night. It is important. And as Mike said at the beginning of our class, look, he jokingly said Hanukkah in 1,000 years from now, but I want there to be humanity 1,000 years from now. I want to make sure that there's humanity. I don't know that there will be, but I want there to be. I think, people always ask this kind of thought question: would you rather go back in time or would you rather go forward in time? Now, ironically, Hezekiah, when he said, I want to see time go backwards, he actually, on the sundial, he's actually telling us a little bit about the framework of his mind, which is, yeah, of course, it's easier to see a miracle by going back. But, it's also a metaphor for what his mindset is, which is things were better back then, right? And for people who live in it with a nostalgic view of life and of history, that's a pretty dangerous thing, right? Because if you want us to go back in time, I mean, literally as a country, what are you saying? I mean, are you saying that the best days were behind us, not in front of us? And there is this fear, I think, that people have that, well, look, there's safety and security in the past. I know what existed back then. I don't know what's going to exist in the future, and it's scary. But if you're not going to make sure that it's at least going to be safe, that it's going to be something that people will be able to live in, getting back to this discussion about the environment, if we destroy our environment, then there is no future, right? So there are people who literally say, I don't care. As long as the environment's good for me for the next 20 years, as long as I'm on this planet, I don't really care. Right. There are people who believe that. I know people honestly believe that. And it's not a political statement. It's just a selfish, I don't care. I don't know what the future is going to hold. So I'm just going to enjoy it now. Their money, their environment, their resources. So as long as I'm safe, and that's the words he uses, Im Shalom, right?
Scientists that discovered the species power.
Yeah, it's a chance for the future. I know but it's exciting because we know that that'll be for the future. Im Shalom ve'emet yeh ve'emet. I want to see the future. I would love to see, I love history. I would love to be able to get a glimpse of what Hezekiah really looked like. I would love to see that. But I'd really love to see the future. I'd love to know that there's a future. I'd love to know that there's humanity still existing. There's still
that movie, The Time Machine.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, but it was based on H.G. Wells. Right. So I would like to know that there's a future, that there's the United States, that there's, Jewish people, whatever. There's, I don't know, remnant of you, a remnant of your family, whatever. whatever it is, remnant of your religion. But this guy doesn't care. Hezekiah says, means I'm okay. Shalom ve'emet, right? It's going to be my days. It's going to be okay. So instead, what does it tell us?
The other events of Hezekiah's reign and all his exploits, and how he made the pool and the conduit and brought the water into the city, are recorded in the annals of the kings of Judah. Hezekiah slept with his fathers, and his son Manasseh succeeded him as king.
Wow. So, again, Judith, what do we know about Hezekiah? Not a lot. Why? Because the Bible is not telling us a lot about it, because it says there's another book, and you can read about that in the other book, the Annals of the Kings, which we don't have. So we can't have this knowledge that the Bible refers to. But what we can do is we can, anytime we want, walk through Hezekiah's tunnel in Jerusalem.
They're so cool.
Back in history to get all these books. We do that.
Bring back the annals. Yes, but this you can actually walk through. Hezekiah's tunnel. It's in Jerusalem. You can walk through this tunnel, which was a aqueduct. It was a way for water, according to the Bible, for the water to come in. And then we uncovered it. We discovered the exact place, and we know it's exactly that place, because there's carvings on the wall that tell us this is Hezekiah's tunnel.
And so there was limits of water then.
Yeah, there's still water in it right now. Yeah, you need to, if you want to walk through the tunnel the whole way, you gotta bring boots. You gotta bring wading boots to get in there. So this tunnel brought water into the city of Jerusalem, and you can walk through it. Now, what's cool about this, of course, is that it tells us that Hezekiah made sure that when his city was laid siege to, that there would be water in the city. It worked. So
Mark,
this was,
are those considered the same as, I seem to remember I walked through something called Solomon's tunnels.
no, Siloam, the Siloam tunnel.
It's the
Siloam
same
tunnel.
thing, though. There's no, I'm remembering mispronunciation.
No. I don't know. Siloam, this tunnel has been excavated. We've got it. We know where it is. Brought water in. You can walk through it today. You can walk through it as long as it's not raining and it's not dangerous. You can walk through the tunnel. I wonder what they said about, what did this say? It connects the Gihon Spring to the Siloam Pool. Let's see. And here it says right here, at the end of the 8th century, and they have an inscription, which we said is the Siloam inscription. So you can see here's the tunnel. There's the spring. Yeah, so this article is about whether or not the tunnel was actually built by him or built before even. What's interesting about the tunnel, here's the tunnel right here. What's interesting about the tunnel is that it's actually, they talk about it during, in the book, what's it called? The Source by James Michener. They talk about how they built tunnels in those days using architectural types of ancient tools, plumb lines, to be able to figure out how they could build a tunnel, because you couldn't just build a tunnel, start digging and not know how far you were digging and how, whether you were digging on a straight line. So they had plumb lines, and what they would do is they'd actually dig the tunnel from two directions. And if they did their work right, they would meet up and they'd have a place where they'd actually be able to connect. But they know this because they could see the way the tunnel was dug, that it was, there was a point where it was, slightly off. And, there's a point where it comes together and the shaft, kind of, there's like an angle, a little slight angle to it. But the point is that we know that they did it, and that they were able to do it. I mean, the fact that they were able to do this without the kinds of work that we have today, the things we can do today, is pretty amazing. So what's interesting about the archaeology, which again, they look at some of the carbon dating of what they can do is they can literally look at the rocks, right? And they can say, well, this piece of rock was cut out at what point? The carbon date it. So here's the thing. According to some of the archaeology, some of the tests, these guys, Ronnie Reich, one of the great archaeologists of Jerusalem, they came to the conclusion that the tunnel must have been constructed by one of his predecessors, dating as early as the time of King Jehoash, a century before the siege. So, is the tunnel built by Hezekiah, or did he work on it based, did he help finish it based on earlier constructions? We don't know. But the question isn't whether it's later, it's only a question of whether it's earlier. So it's a very old tunnel. And again, it was to bring water into the, there are other tunnels in Jerusalem. This one, though, is the oldest tunnel that would have brought water into, well, that we know for a fact that's referred to in the Bible, that brought water into there. So again, there are other channels or other tunnels here. But the fact that we can excavate this, by the way, is all very, very important, and is also very much a reflection of Israel's ability to excavate those areas. If the old city was not under the control of Israel, none of these excavations could have happened. And again, I'm not making any political statement over what should happen, the fate of Jerusalem or anything else. But let me make it very clear that none of these excavations happened before 1967. And they would not be done. They were in Jordanian territory.
Lots of subject, but is it possible, because I know some people feel that the Dead Sea Scrolls got out of Jerusalem during one of the sieges. Could it be possible they used the time to
Get out, yeah. It's very possible that they used tunnels to get out of Jerusalem during the Roman era. These tunnels in particular wouldn't have helped because they would not have gotten out of where the wall was during the Roman siege. So this one wouldn't have helped. There are tunnels that went under Jerusalem that definitely people used to escape. We probably not a lot of people, and probably also, again, not the easiest way to escape, because the Romans would seal off the tunnels. They stationed people around the walls. We read about people escaping Jerusalem during the Roman siege. Generally speaking, though, they went out the front door. What they do would say, hey, would you let us get out? We'll negotiate with you, pay you off. We're not going to fight against you anymore. Just get us out of here.
But for the Dead Sea Scrolls, Romans didn't want that, so.
The Dead Sea Scrolls, the Romans would have, we don't know. I mean, would they even care? Look, we don't know who the Romans, if the Romans were well inclined to these people, then they maybe would have let them out. We don't know. But the city of Jerusalem was very well it's very easy to defend from inside, but once you're inside, it's hard to get outside. It was a problem. And that's why so many people died during the siege of Jerusalem during the Roman period, because they did not um, give up. They, in many cases, set fire and killed themselves rather than give up to the Romans. And then, of course, even before that, as we're going to see next week, this is what happens to the Babylonians. So the Babylonian,
Some of those books, the annals.
that they were burned?
Yeah.
Could be. We don't know. So the next thing that we're going to read next week is we're going to read about the last kings of Judah, starting with Hezekiah's son Manasseh. We're going to read about Manasseh, who was 12 years old when he became king. Not a very old guy when he became king. It means his father died pretty young. Hezekiah still, even though he got 15 extra years, he died pretty young. And if he got 15 extra years, that means that his son was born when he was in that bonus period that he wasn't supposed to have had. So it says that he lives and reigns for 55 years, which is a long time, but when you're 12 years old, it means he only lived to be 67. But we'll get to, it's decent. Yeah, it's decent age, right? We're going to read about that, chapter 21, chapter 22. We read about Josiah, interesting king, another good king. Chapter 23. And then we read, that's chapter 23. And then there's chapter 24. And when we get to the end of these chapters, these are the last chapters in the book of Kings, because then it is over. So either next week or the week after, we are going to finish the book of Kings, and then we'll be done with the book of Kings to Isaiah. I will see you, hopefully all, God willing, everyone, next year of 2023. We wish you a happy new year, a exciting end to this year, and looking to the future as the theme for today, looking into the good 23. We have class tomorrow night, Wednesday night, and we have class of the next year into 2022, our last days. Everyone, thank you for being here with us today, and thank you for being on our journey through the book of Kings. Take care, everybody. We will see you next year.
Bye. Thank you.
Not tomorrow night. Bye-bye. Bye.